When it comes to the battlefield, war ultimately belongs to its generals, right? This is a core principle of Kingdom that was established from the start of the series. And so today, when we see Toe masterfully subjugating a terrified Nanyo, resorting to skewing army numbers and psychological warfare, much like Riboku once did to take out the aging Oki, a lot of readers might say, well, that's just how great generals fight. There are no set patterns. However, what many readers might miss is the clear significant distinction in how Hara writes the two types of generals in his story. It's not about generals leading from the front or the back either. Rather, it's the strategic versus the instinctive. Yes, no general expects all other generals to know or reveal these abilities. However, the strongest generals, the ones with the greatest weight, the ones that have the true makings of a great general, those generals will always recognize the importance of this eternal theme, even if others choose not to. This is the constant and consistent choice of the strongest throughout the series. That's right, Hara established the rule of generals, that war ultimately belongs to them, yet at the same time, chose to make this concept more nuanced than at first glance, as every single truly great general almost deliberately breaks this simple rule. And this is what makes the great generals great. In a story that is all about the finesse of generals, there is no more fitting way to differentiate between which generals rely on cunning strategy and tactics to overwhelm the enemy versus the type of generals that rely on instinct or rather intuition to deliver unpredictable and decisive blows. And today we'll break down this key overarching difference in how generals are written across the entirety of Kingdom. And most importantly, the simple reason that Riboku, despite being the most model general of all strategic generals, is destined to fall short of the mountain peak by virtue of this very general nature. To begin with, what's so interesting about Kingdom is that while it is a series about generals, the traits that are glorified might be more opposite of what most real generals possessed historically during the warring states: honor and bravery. These things are put on a pedestal in Kingdom. The greatest and the most respected generals all embody these traits at an exaggerated level. Now, classic traits like cowardice and deceit or even cheating, which might be traditionally associated with a war-torn world where anything goes since it's war, are actually given to villains or villainous individuals that are meant to eventually be defeated by the heroes. This is because throughout the story, Hara goes out of his way to make clear that the only real general ideal that is actually being glorified in the story is simply the drive to bring about change, to determine the world's and one's destiny. That is the true meaning of being a general that Shin embodies, but all the less pleasant general traits are only ever portrayed in a negative light. A big misconception that many readers have is that just because Shin understands that cheating and whatnot is fair game in war, that Shin himself genuinely accepts this. This could not be further from the case. All this means is that Shin won't actually complain if his opponent is being underhanded, but Shin himself will win through his own way of warfare. And Shin, of course, will always naturally choose the path that might be more difficult, but feels more earned. We see this most clearly when Oki is breaking it down to a young Shin. Oki explains that every general views the battlefield in his own individualized way, and therefore how one perceives the battlefield is the key to finding the difference between generals. Now Shin, as an instinctive general, similar to Jukyo, sees the battlefield as a great blaze, or in other words, as a vast land of momentum and opportunity. This brings us over to the Battle of Jian. Shin and the Qin army are surrounded and outnumbered due to a third party, being Seika, meaning that it was not a fair fight to begin with. Despite this, Shin doesn't really complain, and makes it clear that he doesn't mind by focusing on finding a solution instead, on where the fire is, as one can't really complain about fair and unfair in war. However, at the same time, it is established that just because Shin doesn't mind the opponent using underhanded tactics, Shin himself refuses to stoop down to that level. After the Battle of Baiyo, Shin had the option to assassinate Riboku, but he didn't want to win that way. Shin wants to beat him at full strength in a fair fight, and that is the only way to surpass Oki. And so there is no better way than what happened at Jian for Shin to counter Riboku straight up. That's the key difference. Shin is always approaching each challenge with a goal. At every step of his journey, the recurring phrase is, "I will overcome and become the greatest general under the heavens." It is the purpose of each fight. Every opponent is an opportunity, a stepping stone to get closer and closer to achieving this dream, which is very fitting with instinctive warfare, which relies on Shin capitalizing on opportunity. and Shin will not feel satisfied becoming the greatest general under the heavens through any sort of shortcuts. For instance, Shin hates the idea of besting Riboku in a duel outside of battle, without actually besting him in war. As to Shin, this status is earned only if he surpasses people near worthy of that title, like Oki or now Riboku. Shin will never accept any sort of shortcut in this race, or for that matter, in any fight. He wants to win through his own strength. The same reason Shin decides to fight Riboku without cheating is the same reason Shin ultimately decides that he wants to fight Gyoen by his own means. This is what the greatest great generals do. They do not cheat and take things into their own hands. And so it should be evident simply from reading the manga, but Hara pretty much made it clear from the beginning of the story that instinctive generals are superior to strategic ones. I mean, after all, if we remember correctly, Jukyo, the pinnacle of instinct, did best the strategic Gokei in war. Shin's drive to do things the right way and avoid fighting unfairly is so extreme that he literally chooses to turn against an ally when confronting Kanki. Because even though he wants to win, he doesn't think it's fair to mistreat innocent people, even if they are enemy citizens. And this same characteristic of Shin, of not wanting to cheat a victory, is the same thing we see with all other truly great generals. Oki is the prime example of a great general. He knows that all is technically fair in war, but there is something that goes beyond being a simple general, which is one's own sense of honor. This is what drives Oki to not complain, but rather weirdly enough smile in the face of looming defeat during the Battle of Baiyo. Note right here, the reason why Oki is no longer sweating and instead smiles is not just because Riboku has impressed him, as all he did was have slightly faster horses. The moment that Oki decided that Riboku already surpassed his level is when he saw how all his machinations up till now have led to Oki being placed in a life or death situation, a true strategic masterclass, no matter how underhanded. So Oki can now see that this mysterious man is cut from a similar cloth as him, carrying a similar weight, which is practically confirmed when Oki states that he has been completely outplayed by the prime strategic general, in which he is the prototype. See, this is the unwritten rule in war. Cheating is allowed, but a battle between great generals is no place for such behavior, which is why it is so sad that Oki ends up losing to an arrow in the back. He wasn't completely right about Riboku after the fact, though Shin being the instinctive type will redeem him and prove why war actually belongs to its truly great generals, by winning in the end without any scheming or underhanded tricks. He will best Riboku through sharpened and honed instinctive warfare. This honorable type of mentality is seen among all great generals possessing a heavy weight. They only want what they deem as a fair fight. They want to conquer their opponent in a true victory, and it just so happens that the hybrid instinctive generals are still alive, which is not a coincidence. Hybrid instinctive generals must be the true pinnacle, which is why Shin differs from Jukyo, who is way more aggressive, while Shin chooses his moments. Rinpa didn't even want to resume his duel with Mogo now that he lost an arm. Shin to this day hates the fact that they only defeated Xiao during Tokyo Hills due to Kanki's cruel methods. This headstrong mentality is so insane that whereas someone like the strategic General Moten will happily rely on a surprise attack, or in this specific case, capture and execution of Riboku, Shin views something like that as such a false victory that he would, if he could, probably unchain Riboku so that he can defeat him straight up in war. This is what it means to be a great general. The crazy thing is Riboku would obviously expect this reaction, as he knows this is how the strong like Oki do things. He deduced this though, rather than experiencing it for himself. It makes a lot of sense. He doesn't even consider himself strong, going as far as labeling himself a coward, and we know now for good reason. This all goes back to the main idea of the story of Kingdom. Even though the series is technically framed around generals of the warring states, the further we read, the more we realize the story is really more about the eternal strategy versus instinct. Individuals are simply labeled generals or great generals by their kingdoms to maintain any form of high prestige over the rest of China, but in reality, the strongest generals have their own supreme identities. Great generals in their own right, all competing to become the greatest under heaven. This is a story of great generals under the facade as a story of the warring states, which is why towards the top, we can see those that have climbed the highest and achieved the most have done so because they possess the true weight of a great general. It is the weaker and earlier opponents like Riboku and Kanki that act more like traditional generals in their approach to war, happily cheating, falling short, and then failing to to understand why they don't have what it takes to reach the highest level under heaven. Note, even though it is more common among villains, it is not a distinction between the good or bad side. As I said at the beginning, it is the distinction between strategic and instinctive generals. Even protagonists like Kanki and Osen, while they are successful generals in their own right, are nothing compared to the likes of Renpa, Oki, and so on, as Kanki and Osen are ultimately strategic schemers. Kanki is always trying to think of some clever plan to eliminate the opponent without actually having to fight them straight up, as does Osen. There's a reason why these characters would never be the greatest generals under the heavens, and aren't favored by Sei, as they are clearly written very differently than the truly great generals. Yes, they are great generals, but they do not have the traits to be truly great, as all the hybrid instinctive generals, whether good or evil, do, and will always prefer to earn their victories through their own strength and nothing more. Finally, let's talk about Riboku more in detail. He is the one exception to this rule. He might be, but does not act like, a great general. Whereas all these other cheating and scheming generals across the story seem to have a set limit to their success, as none of their schemes will ever allow them to reach the true level of the strongest. Riboku has actually managed to defy this barrier. He is the one general who seems to have climbed towards the top of the mountain while still acting like a scheming strategic general, rather than a truly great general. Among the strongest generals, Riboku, the sole dirty player, is the odd one out. There's a reason that Oki knows instinctively that no matter who is aiming to be and is the greatest under heaven, even Riboku of all people will be overtaken. Whereas Shin always avoids cheating and shortcuts, overcoming challenges head on his way to climbing to the greatest general under the heavens, Riboku is a cheater at heart. He will avoid any challenge that he can and take any shortcut possible. He will backstab his allies, allowing them to die to use them as bait. He will allow his ally to disgrace a duel while Oki is weakened. He'll keep using his ally without care until he has outlived his usefulness. Riboku embodies all the negative traits of generals, and the way that his army fights reflects that. I definitely believe that's a large reason why Hara deemed it necessary to give him multiple overpowered allies, as the rest of the greatest generals, good or bad, made it to the top mainly through their own strength and weight. The true defining characteristic of the greatest general under the heavens should be to carry the heaviest weight. Riboku, as the one exception and the least deserving, is the only one who got to the top through underhanded tactics instead, which doesn't represent weight at all. In fact, both of Riboku's victories that put him on the map reflect his foul play, as he earned both of them by taking advantage of allies and opportunity. In fact, Riboku is such a cheater that he breaks the rule of strategic generals itself by somehow training his army to partake in instinctive warfare when it shouldn't even be possible. His very ability is the definition of cheating the system. So looking at Riboku and his army, we should at least give him a clap, having made it this far by being a bunch of cheating, cunning bastards, in a world where honor and true weight tends to get you further. It is interesting though, to see a general that acts like what an actual general would probably do to win, which is anything and everything, being set up to be one of the final rivals to Shin. At the same time, we can't forget what Riboku is at the end of the day. He is a bozo. As Kanki said, he is corrupt and pathetic, stealing most of his power by sucking up to public opinion and higher authority. But ultimately, in Kingdom, cheaters don't win in the end, and Riboku is set up to be the perfect example of how following this wrong type of path will come back to bite you in the ass. And that there is merit in taking the honorable, more difficult path, which Shin is doing right now as an instinctive general. So enough of my yapping. All in all, there is a lot of nuance when it comes to general types in Kingdom. It's not just strategy versus instinct. But if you want an answer, surely we now know instinct please, or will eventually. Did you enjoy this video? Check out my other videos. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated on my latest videos. I appreciate you guys.